only thing I can think about or I felt was just this deep sense of anger with the system. What the heck? I'm 17, doing what I think I should be doing, right? Which is riding my bike on the sidewalk, good for the environment, good for my health, living physically active. I get hit. Well, we hit each other. But I mean, instead of going maybe a 50-50 split, I paid for the whole darn thing.
Welcome to the My SGV podcast. Our mission is to capture and share the stories of the people of the San Gabriel Valley. We believe our diversity is what makes the SGV great. And no matter where you're from in the San Gabriel Valley, you will feel welcome.
All right, SGVers, welcome back to another episode of the My SGV podcast. Thank you for tuning in. If you are a regular listener, we appreciate you spending this time with us. And if you're new here, welcome. We hope you enjoy this, and we hope you consider subscribing for more content. Well, Scott, you often mention this idea of looking ahead, and sometimes it's 5 years and 10 years, and maybe this concept of 50 years was the only thing. First time I got introduced to that was around you, speaking of like city planning. But there's a real need when it comes to city and I guess its community to have a real far-reaching perspective.
That's right. Yeah. You've got to have people who have vision. They're seeing many, many decades, down the road. And what's also interesting is at a community level, and we're all about community in the San Gabriel Valley, how at a community level or at a very small local place, something can affect what happens, how changes occur in a community, something that you wouldn't think has anything to do with the major changes that could occur just because of that event.
Sure.
And I think today we have kind of an example of how something small and unexpected is leading to major changes in the San Gabriel Valley.
And the visual analogy to that is the pebble like dropped in the pond, right? And the ripples that spread out from there, and they get wider as the farther you go out and affect more things, right? Yeah. It's incredible to think of every big change, major change often starts with one person, one idea, one thing.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
like our show, right? Like why can't we be the first drop in the pond for this that affects the San Gabriel Valley and bringing this unity?
It all starts with an idea, just a little idea in somebody's mind. And then you have, a whole new industry. You have, I'm thinking of Microsoft or something like that, just a small idea, but it took over the world, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. In the San Gabriel Valley, you can see many people's ideas that have taken off and grown into many different businesses. And, if you want to check out other ideas and other things in the San Gabriel Valley, don't forget San Gabriel Valley Now, your source for city news, announcements, events, special savings, and everything SGV. They do a great job at posting really relevant content and things going on in the SGV. So check them out on Instagram. They also have a magazine, SGV Now, on their website, sgvnow.com. Well, Scott, that brings us to our guest today. His name is Javier Hernandez. He's the Director of Innovation and Communications for the City of Pico Rivera. Javier, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, I have to clarify because people are like maybe grumbling now. Oh, what? Pico Rivera, that's not in the SGV. So would you like me to explain why you're here, or would you like to share that with our audience?
Yeah, no, I mean, I could talk a little bit about that. Yeah, you're right. The city of Pico Rivera is not necessarily technically within the boundaries of the San Gabriel Valley, but it is immediately adjacent. We share a border. Our northern border, which is the Whittier Narrows Dam, is the southern border of the San Gabriel Valley for that respective area. And so as a result, we kind of consider ourselves, I guess, when it's convenient to be a part of the San Gabriel Valley.
Sure.
Just really depends on what we're working on. But nevertheless, I mean, I am indeed, I was raised in the San Gabriel Valley, did a lot of work in the San Gabriel Valley, built a lot of friends and network in the San Gabriel Valley. And to this day, still, do a lot of work in the San Gabriel Valley.
And what happened to you that has made major changes in the San Gabriel Valley also occurred in the San Gabriel Valley.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were raised in the San Gabriel Valley. Where did that take place?
Yeah. Before I actually touch on being raised in the San Gabriel Valley, particularly in Hacienda Heights, I do want to start off the story with the fact that I'm actually a child of Pico Rivera. When my parents first came in, my dad from Mexico City, my mom from Tijuana, Mexico, they met in Pico Rivera. And, typical story of an immigrant where parents came in, first generation here, born in the United States. And, Pico Rivera was our first home. And unfortunately, in the good name of economic development, my mom's parents received a notification of eminent domain proceedings, essentially got displaced from the city of Pico Rivera to build a Home Depot and a shopping center in that area. So that forced us to move out to an extent. It was largely why we moved out of there. And then, as a result, the vast majority of our family also moved out. We still have some family that live there as well. But from there, we went to Hacienda Heights, and that's really where our roots really started to spread in the San Gabriel Valley. And that's where I consider myself a child of Pico Rivera, but frankly raised in Hacienda Heights. But kind of leading up to my story here, in Hacienda Heights, like almost any other teenager or youth or child in any community, you get around either by walking or riding a bike or a scooter or a skateboard or something along those lines. For me, it was the bicycle. I used that to get around all over the community. I got to learn the nooks and crannies of, Hacienda Heights, the back alleys and, the little alleyways and back entrances to major shopping centers or things like that. But I remember distinctly, I was out with a good friend of mine that I've known since I was in kindergarten or so. And we were riding in the mountains of Hacienda Heights, the Puente Hills. Beautiful landscape there. And we were mountain biking. It's just what we did. We would go up in the mountains, didn't really know anybody else that mountain bike. It was just us two that would regularly go up to the mountains, just have a good old time. But we were heading back on a regular, residential street. And I was coming across a driveway, so riding my bike on the sidewalk. And those driveways, the banana driveways, you drive in one way, you come out the other way. Well, it was a genuine accident. No, I didn't see the car didn't see me. Very legitimate accident. And I got hit by that vehicle right while I was riding my bike on the sidewalk. And, I flew off my bike and I kind of spun in midair and hit their mailbox. And then I just basically bent it and broke it. I was 17 at the time, so I popped right up and I was like, hey, I'm okay. Everything's fine. The individual who was driving was very apologetic. And we just chalked it up to it being a very real accident. So we grabbed each other's insurance information. I filed a claim, and then the insurance kind of stepped in at that point. And when that happened, it was interesting because within a matter of a couple of days, I want to say, from the accident occurring, I received a notification or call that basically said that I had lost the claim and that I was found to be at fault for the accident. And they chalked it up to California Vehicle Code 21200. In a nutshell, a lot more provisions to that and subcodes to that. But all in all, basically means is that if a local jurisdiction does not regulate the usage of a bicycle on a sidewalk, then you have to use that bicycle on the street. And what's interesting is there's no age associated with that rule. So technically, if you have a 5-year-old riding a bike, you have to ride that bike on the street. Well, in that particular area, the street had a posted street speed limit of 35 miles per hour. So cars, prevailing speed is a little bit faster than that. So it's dangerous to ride your bike on the street. And I would much rather be hit by a car coming out of a driveway than coming full speed on the street. So those are the types of decisions that people like myself and others make on a very regular basis. Is it safer to take the sidewalk, or is it safer to, share the road with 18-wheel trucks? Very simple decision to make. But anyhow, just to wrap up that part of the story is that the individual happened to be driving his grandmother's car without permission. She was upset that no one was going to fix her car because her car got damaged because it did hit my bike, destroyed my bike, also kind of injured my back. And she filed a counterclaim against my car insurance, which I had just got because I was 17 years old. I just got my license, just got my insurance, just started driving. Very exciting time in life. And then I had a file claimed, or a claim that was filed against me, and I lost that claim too. So I ended up paying almost $3,000 as a 17-year-old. My parents were in no position to really help me with that, to pay for the repairs on that vehicle. And the only thing I can think about, or I felt, was just this deep sense of anger with the system. What the heck? I'm 17, doing what I think I should be doing, right? Which is riding my bike on the sidewalk, good for the environment, good for my health, living physically active. I get hit. Well, we hit each other. But I mean, instead of going maybe a 50-50 split, I paid for the whole darn thing. And that's when I really realized that vulnerable road users, which I'll get into later, don't necessarily have dedicated space in the public realm to truly feel safe to bike, to walk, to play. I remember just thinking, okay, well, I'm gonna take note of that incident, and I'm gonna stash that one away for when it's time. And that eventually grew and festered within me to a point where there was a number of other occasions throughout my life in the San Gabriel Valley that just bubbled up, and it just felt, you know what, it's time to pull out that instance and build something around that. So that's at that point, many years later, I really dedicated myself. Let me backtrack a little bit, because it was interesting that I would tell people this very story, meeting with members of the community. I would start doing some educational workshops and sessions. And the more I told the story, the more people I ran into who had a similar story. What do you mean? Oh my God, you're not going to believe it, but I lost my grandfather crossing the street on a major boulevard. Yeah, my son got run over a couple of years back and missing half his leg. You know, you hear about these stories about people losing their loved ones. And I started having this deep connection with people around this one story. And then I just started realizing, I'm like, look, is there a trend building here that no one knows about? What the heck is going on? How come no one is addressing Vehicle Code 21200 and creating safer space? Why? What the heck? We all pay taxes. We should get our fair share of benefits within our community. And that's when, at that point, I really started building strong relationships with individuals around this common theme. And I got to a point where I just felt fed up with hearing these stories and nothing really happening about it. And so I started a nonprofit organization called Cyclertopia. This is now, I want to say, years later. The accident happened, when I was 17, and that was maybe 1997, 98 or so. It wasn't until 2007, 2008, I started Cyclertopia in Hacienda Heights, started partnering with local jurisdictions. I remember being moved by a story I had heard about Bogota, Colombia, doing these big ciclovia events, right, where they close down the streets, they open it up to people to do festivities, parades, and, walk, jog, run with your dog, ride a bike, whatever it is. But it became, from my readings, that it was culturally understood that Sundays are ciclovia days and everyone participates. And it was no longer government-ran closures of the streets, right? So it was more like people rolling out their trash cans and, hey, no one's going to drive through my street today because it's ciclovia, right? Today is owned by the people. The streets are owned by the people today, not the cars. And I remember just hearing about that. And I was like, I want to replicate that. I want to do something like that and use that as an opportunity to educate leaders, community leaders, elected officials. And that's exactly what we did. We partnered with the city of La Puente. We shut down, if I recall correctly, about 5 miles worth of streets. And then the bikers had their day where we all just kind of got to do a loop around the community and then had a big celebration afterward. But the amount of people that came out and supported that was really moving. And then I got more requests to do it here in another community in Baldwin Park, another community in El Monte, South El Monte. And then I started hearing about some other folks doing very, very similar work in the West San Gabriel Valley. And they were at the very early stages of creating an organization themselves called the West San Gabriel Valley Bicycle Coalition. And they were setting themselves up to be a chapter of the county bicycle coalition. I reached out and I was like, hey, I see what you're doing is really cool. It aligns so well with the kind of work that I'm doing. And I'm a one-man show over here, and I'd love to see if there's an opportunity to partner. And it was a match made in heaven. We had a very preliminary meeting. We kind of just talked about broader visions and ideas that we can, of things to do, how to, possibly unify the group. So eventually, that's exactly what happened. We merged the two organizations, and we formed an organization that was called Bike San Gabriel Valley. And that became a formal nonprofit after a while. It's now known as Active San Gabriel Valley, and they're still very active in the San Gabriel Valley. And it was just it was a great opportunity to work with like-minded individuals of a common goal who really were passionate to bring about positive change. Bringing about that change, however, was actually incredibly difficult. You end up taking more arrows to the back than anything else, at least at the onset.
Well, let's find out what you were doing exactly at the beginning. Were you closing streets and allowing the streets to belong to the people?
Not at first. At first, so I was working with another nonprofit organization, really learning the ins and outs of managing programs. And it was, at the time, it was a nonprofit that was dedicated to addressing issues around the spread of STDs, HIV, and AIDS, and young teenage pregnancies, of preventative work within the community. And that's where I got my first kind of taste of introducing public policy, and then implementing public policy, and then researching the effects of those policies, and then amending programs to continue preventing those types of issues. So I learned a lot in that nonprofit. It's called Choices Camp, originally based in La Puente, and then eventually moved to Cal State Los Angeles, where we had an office there. But I remember very clearly at the time, that nonprofit was very reliant on grant funding. And grant funding ended up drying out for that respective broad issue, because it was one of those things where we and a coalition of other nonprofits that did similar work worked themselves out of a job in many ways, right? Where we did such a great job that rates for STDs and teenage pregnancy started to drop and decline, so much so that the state had to pivot and address the next most pressing public health issue, which was obesity, right? So that is when I said, this is the perfect opportunity to pull out that situation that I faced when I was 17 years old, get people on a bike, physically active.
Fight the obesity problem.
To fight the obesity problem, while at the same time introduce the bicycle as a sustainable mode of transport to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gases, and at the same time to improve safety on the roadway, to reduce or prevent serious accidents that result in injury or, God forbid, fatality. So I was like, man, this is a trifecta. We could do all of that with one tool, the bicycle. What a great thing. So I pleaded with my bosses of Choices Camp, money's drying up in this world, but we can pursue money in this world, and we can continue doing good transformative work. And I recall my bosses looking at me dead in the eyes saying, thank you, but no thank you. This is our world of expertise. We don't know anything about bikes. And I was like, oof, I felt deflated. And I was like, well, then I'm going to dedicate myself, because I keep hearing these stories. This terrible situation happened to me. Someone needs to do something about some of this. And so at that point, I pivoted They allowed me to operate from that space at Cal State Los Angeles, which was fantastic. What an amazing leg up with regard to starting a nonprofit, to have space from which to operate, especially on a college campus, right, where you have access to students, you have access to academics, access to resources, somewhat centrally located at Cal State LA. But that's when I started hosting education workshops. All I wanted to do was just teach people the basics about the rules of the road when riding a bike, right? How to avoid accidents, how to avoid, perilous situations. And then eventually I built up enough momentum in partnership, and then we eventually partnered with this other group, West San Gabriel Valley Bike Coalition. And that's when our message amplified. And that's when we said, you know what, it's time to go from educational programs and community bike rides and move on to something a little bit more impactful, right? And that's when we started talking about having street closures and community festivals. We started adding a bike ride to your typical 5K in a local city, or 5K, 10K. And little by little, we started to get a little bit more recognition about the work that we were doing. And I remember when we first got our first big grant, we were trying to address obesity and street safety and sustainability somewhat holistically. And we got a grant to do a bicycle master plan in partnership with 5 cities in the San Gabriel Valley. So it was the city of Monterey Park, the city of San Gabriel, El Monte, South El Monte, and Baldwin Park. I talked a little bit about how challenging it was to bring forth change, because the truth is that, we would go to council meetings originally and just proclaim the need for, safe space. No real data to back it up, just a whole bunch of really good stories, anecdotes. And it just wasn't enough. It wasn't compelling enough at that time. But it wasn't until we started to mobilize, and that's where I think I learned the power of the people when it comes to introducing policy. Council members will, not necessarily side with you on an issue if you're 1 to 10 people showing up sporadically throughout a year.
But if you're an organized movement, that's different.
We started showing up to council meetings 200, 300 people deep.
Yeah, they had to take notice.
And I would just, open up the discussion or our public comment period by saying, there are 300 people behind me. Every single person is here to speak for their allotted 3 minutes. And we were going to show up every single council meeting with the same message. All we're looking for is to be safe in our community.
And what were you looking for? What specifically were you asking?
So it's sometimes this misconception that all bikers just want bike lanes, right? But the truth is that it was a little bit deeper than that. We wanted to feel as any other member of a community that simply didn't have dedicated space, right? Walkers, pedestrians have sidewalks. Cars, more so than any other, object, has the most amount of space. As we know, our streets, our communities are very car-oriented or car-centric development, where you have drive-through restaurants, you have oceans of parking lots for small footprint of retail space, or, you have single-family residences with 1 to 4 car garages. It's no secret, right? Our communities are very car-oriented, and there was literally no space on our roadways to accommodate. So beyond just the bike lane or a protected bike lane, we wanted to educate motorists also that, yes, you're right. You have every right to that road, but so do we. And as a result, we weren't just out to educate bicyclists. We were out to educate motorists. I was very actively involved at the state level when the state adopted the Complete Streets Act of 2006 that requires cities in local jurisdictions to design their streets that prioritizes safety for vulnerable road users. And what's a vulnerable road user, right? So that became defined, right? Youth, seniors, people with disabilities, bicyclists, transit users. And then that gave rise to creating better bus shelters, shade. So something as simple as providing shade, bike lanes, protected bike lanes, better designed parks for children, safe routes to school, the 3-foot law, right, that came out afterward. And so what we really wanted was this broader recognition that the bicycle or other types of individual mobility devices are a mode of transport, like any other mode of transport. And therefore, we need to design our communities accordingly with that in mind. And so we pursued very, very aggressively a whole bunch of grants, and we very aggressively pursued public policy changes or new public policy at the very, very local level. One of the things that we really focused on was creating proofs of concept, turning one city into a champion city that then we could then replicate a model.
Is there that champion city?
Yeah, there's several now, but at the very early stages, one that rises to the top with regard to this idea of creating safe space is the city of Temple City. They implemented the first what they call cycle track on Rosemead Boulevard, one of the largest arterials in the entire San Gabriel Valley. In fact, the Rosemead goes all the way from East Pasadena to the foothills of the mountains, and it travels south all the way to the city of Long Beach, practically to the sand of the ocean. So
it's a state highway 19, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's known and recognized as a State Highway 19 or State Highway 164 because it's Rosemead Boulevard / Lakewood Boulevard further south. But most of the local jurisdictions who had that highway in their city have the roadway's been relinquished from the state Caltrans to the local jurisdiction. And that's very important. I do want to highlight that because it was very difficult for Temple City, for example, to implement such aggressive change if they didn't own the roadway, right? Otherwise, they'd have to go through a series of bureaucratic processes and approvals at the state level. But the state has an abundance of other priorities, not one little segment, right?
But then you're losing the consistency and uniformity of a long stretch of road because you go through many cities.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you absolutely do. So there's no question that the profile of Rosemead Boulevard in Temple City is drastically different than any other segment along that entire 26.5-mile stretch.
Well, that's interesting. Now, what differences do you see? What are some of those differences?
Yeah, and if I encourage anybody who lives in and around the area to go check it out because it's very, very, very evident how different it is. So the moment you go under the railroad bridge there, if you're traveling north on Rosemead Boulevard, the first thing you're going to be greeted by is a row of trees, right? And we talked a little bit about the shade, right? And other landscaping, so shrubs and California natives. The palm tree is not so much California native, but they add this aesthetic, this appeal that just makes it so much more comforting, right? And that's one thing is, having those kinds of amenities in your community, just an abundance of trees makes it that much more pleasant, right? It's colorful, provides shade, it reduces the temperatures at the street level. But then at the same time, you also have the county, if not the state's first protected bike lane. And at the time, the state of California, kind of part of this broader movement, there was another piece of policy and legislation that was introduced to create a new classification for a bike path facility, right? So you had your class 1, which is your off-street facility, and that's your typical bike path on the river, at a park. You have a class 2, which is on the roadway, a painted bike lane on the street. And then a class 3 bike lane, which is a shared lane between a car and a bike. They call those the sharrows. And so the state approved and introduced a new classification, class 4 bikeway. And that's your protected bikeway, where you have, design varies in many different communities, but you have, for the most part, your sidewalk, a small median with some landscaping, trees, things like that. Your bike lane from curb, maybe about 4 or 5 feet of bike lane. And then you have a protective barrier that separates vehicles from the bicycles.
Yeah, I think I know where that is on Rosemead. Trying to think of like Broadway, not Broadway.
It seems to end at Doherty. Maybe I'm going too far north, but I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it.
It goes,
because we drive it every day probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it is a definite difference. There is the shade, the trees.
Yeah.
And I now the next time I drive it, I'm going to look more carefully at that separated bike path, right?
Instead,
protected bike path.
I would encourage to just try biking it.
Yeah.
Because and the reason I encourage that is because you'll get it.
Yeah.
You'll
right.
understand
Yeah.
what we're trying to achieve by doing something as simple as riding a bike in a safe space.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's one of those things, if we want to have
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
societal shift,
Right.
if we're looking for societal behavioral shift, people need to feel safe.
Right.
And one of the things that we identified as an opportunity, or one of those things that could potentially unlock that shift in societal's behavior to, move more around on a bicycle, we targeted women and youth, right? Moms. If moms could feel comfortable enough to take their kids biking to the grocery store, to school in the morning, to after school camp, to karate class, and those kids, it becomes kind of ingrained as part of their intrinsic culture in their community, they're very likely going to grow up into adulthood riding their bike more often, especially if their community creates an environment that it's safe, it's encouraged, and supportive. So we felt that was we created a lot of programs that specifically targeted women and kids, and to see what kind of an effect that can have.
Well, that's quite revolutionary thinking and accomplishment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it there in Rosemead, and I'm wondering how, Temple City, Rosemead in the city of Temple City. Has that concept been developed elsewhere now? Are you seeing a lot of that growth?
Yeah. So after that happened, I really got to tip my hat to the leadership in Temple City, because they were kind of daring out on their own, experimenting with these types of facilities. But they captured so much positive attention across the board, right? Because one of the things that's very interesting is the first complaint everybody is going to introduce is like, oh, you're going to jam traffic. Everyone's going to have such a difficult time getting through here. And they come to find out the traffic actually hasn't been impacted all that much. Instead, what they have seen is fatalities go down, serious injury go down, incidents altogether has gone down, and businesses along the corridor who at the very beginning were very opposed to the idea because they were losing on-street parking, and they felt like, oh, shoot, I can't lose parking because then I'm going to lose business. Well, and this is one of those, maybe it's exaggerated, but it worked in our advantage. But there was a story we would always tell. It's like, well, when was the last time a car walked into your business and pulled out its wallet and spent money? Yeah, you need people to do that. So why don't you figure out a way to cater to the people, right? And it turns out that if obviously it requires a little bit of creativity for any local business to attract a new audience. But, once they figure it out, like anything else in life, they have to evolve, right? And once they learned that, I think those that identified ways to attract new clientele survived or thrived even more. And so we found that to be an interesting thing as well. And that's where a lot of other cities started to now replicate this and started to implement this new classification, the Class 4 bikeway, right? And there's been all kinds of guidance, design guidance, engineering guidance that has been introduced since then to improve upon what they've done there. But I really must say, to this day, it is still very much avant-garde with respect to creating safe space for vulnerable road users.
Well, that's too bad, isn't it? It should be more accepted.
No, I meant avant-garde in the sense that it's still kind of well accepted and now being replicated, but it's still very...
almost an elite type of...
Yeah, it's still very much the example.
Yeah.
Right? Even though there are other communities that do it differently and perhaps maybe better to their respective environment, but there's always that one that did it first, and it still holds up to be a shining example of how to do it.
Yeah.
So that's one city that kind of comes to the top as a leader.
I'm curious, what kind... Oh, I'm sorry, Russell has
I remember
Oh,
first driving in southbound on Rosemead and seeing it constructed, and I had that thought. I was like, oh man, it's going to really jam it up, right? And as you're saying that, like I still drive that route. I avoid it, like, let's say Friday afternoon, right? But I haven't felt anything different.
Yeah.
When was that put in? Do you know?
Oh boy. Okay, let me think.
There was some recent construction on Rosemead.
I want to say that was 2012, 2013 or so. You know, the other thing too that they did, it wasn't just one or the other with respect to that project. It was what I would now consider, and which is what I do now for the City of Pico Rivera, is holistic master planning. They master planned the entire corridor, right? They didn't just do a bike lane or a bunch of trees. They did the asphalt, the utilities, the street posts, the lights, all LEDs. They integrated beautiful artwork, installations, improved driveways. They changed the radiuses for some of the turning points at various intersections. They synchronized the lights. They master planned it.
Yeah.
And they implemented it all at once, right? Which requires, you don't see a shovel in the ground right away, but when the shovel goes in, you're not gonna see another shovel for a long time. Mm-hmm. So you don't end up with this perpetual construction on a major corridor. You do it once, pull off the Band-Aid,
right.
And then next thing you know, you have a shining example of how to do a really nice, comprehensive, holistic project.
One thing I have noticed more of lately is sharrows.
Yeah, sharrows. Yeah, I have my gripe with sharrows.
Well, you're mixing a car and a bike in the same lane.
Well, let's remember, Vehicle Code 21200 requires that mixing to take place anyway.
But I think it's a bit confusing.
It is.
Yeah.
It is confusing. And
because
that's where
you think it's a bike lane.
Right. Yeah, and it's one of those things where they implement these new signs on the street itself, but they, when I say they, I mean like government in general or Caltrans, wherever it is, don't do a very good job of educating the public about what those new signs mean or how you're supposed to interact with those signs. So, it's one of those things where implementation of practically anything does also require educational programming associated with that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Outreach, engagement, it's absolutely critical. You can't do one without the other, or you end up with this mass confusion.
Yeah.
And that we have seen time and time again.
Actually, I thought that those features on the side of the road on Rosemead were actually to separate parking in some spots without knowing, what it actually was for. I think I can recall like some maybe in front of a preschool that's there. And I thought it was for safety or for safety reasons, like cars couldn't come by or whatever. But I didn't really know that it was for bikes. Yeah, nothing has been put out. But Javier, when we first spoke, we Zoomed before the show, and you had shown me this diagram or illustration of this corridor, and we were speaking about how does your work impact this SGV, since you're from this, and you're like, oh, here you go. And I was like, okay, there. I can very clearly see, but I want to get into that a little bit more if you can. But let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Okay, great.
At WarmuthLaw, they believe that just because you speak a foreign language, come from a different culture, or simply don't know how to navigate the legal system, that should not prevent you from compensation from injury or receiving benefits. Their multicultural staff have been helping SGVers like you for over 38 years. Visit law888.com or call them at 626-784-7017 and tell them you heard about them on this podcast.
All right, we're back with Javier. Javier, before the break, we were talking about this project that affects Rosemead Boulevard in the San Gabriel Valley.
Yeah.
But before that, when we come back from break, we like to ask a question from this box of icebreakers.
Oh, great.
Yeah, they're supposed to be lighthearted, so I sort of sort through them to match the tone of the show and the guest, and so you can choose to answer it or you can decline. So it's no pressure.
Okay.
If
cool.
you don't answer, Scott and I will answer. So here we go. What was your favorite subject in school?
That's one of the very simple ones that we've had.
Okay. PE?
Okay.
I guess it just depends on, I mean, if it was high school, I got to say it was science. I mean, biology in particular, that really piqued my interest. I was learning a lot about dinosaurs and the history of our Earth, and I really got into chemistry. I became a biology major as a result of, my passion for the sciences at the time. But interestingly, it wasn't until I got into college and further pursued biology at the community college level, I took a trip to Costa Rica where I studied abroad, and I took tropical ecology. Absolutely loved it. And this is exactly what I want to do. I want to do something related to biology in this kind of an atmosphere where you're just surrounded by jungle and animals and just this vibrant ecosystem. I mean, you can feel the lungs of the earth working when you're in Costa Rica. Beautiful, beautiful. Then I came back to the concrete jungle, and I was like, ugh, this is not biology.
Yeah.
You know, and I realized if I wanted to pursue something in that kind of arena, I had to be in a place like Costa Rica. But I was in no position to get up and go. And that's all the while I was in high school and also in my early years of college, and actually throughout college, there was always something else that I did. I always had like a little side hustle, if you will. And I DJ'd, and I did community events. I did event planning and coordinating. I built a network of other service providers, whether it be photography, recording, music producers, etc. But I always did that on the side. Never thought of doing it at all at any point professionally until I got back from Costa Rica. I realized biology is not going to happen for me as much as I love it. And I got back to the city and I said, okay, maybe I start taking this little side hustle and treating it more like an actual business, because I'm making pretty good money doing it and I'm having a good time. So I changed my major to business, and that then set me on path to establish a foundation by which to then manage my nonprofit, and then to eventually better understand the inner workings of government, budgets, things like that. So
Yeah, that was a
Awesome.
very practical course. I always like to know, where did people go to college? Where did you go?
So I went to Citrus College in Glendora/Azusa. And that was my first couple years of college. And then immediately after that, I went straight to Cal State Fullerton. And that's where I got my business degree. And then years later, I eventually got my executive master's degree at USC. But yeah, it was one of those things where I applied in high school to USC. It was just one of those schools I just knew I had to go there.
Oh, so you went there.
Yeah, I had to force them to let me in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got denied in high school, got denied after junior college, got denied after business school. And I was like, we know a fourth time's the charm.
Yeah, right.
So eventually built up a portfolio and experience that I guess became a little bit more compelling for USC.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, Scott, what was your favorite subject in school?
So I never liked any subject. So it's really what was the least disliked subject, and probably arithmetic, or maybe algebra, certainly not geometry or the algebra 2 or none of that. But, I like basic math, basic arithmetic, probably that, because I can't think of anything else. Certainly not biology.
Yeah, that's funny. That so when I think of school, I'm thinking of elementary school, and I often found myself bored. And my 7th grade math teacher, I was good at math, and he's like, "Oh, why don't you join the math club?" And I was like, "Okay." And I didn't know that. I didn't know it existed, and I didn't know there was different competitions in the math club. And so he's sort of evaluating me, and he's like, "Oh, you'll be good at speed math." I was like, "Okay, I like that." And at that time, they had a overhead projector. Remember those, like you?
Yeah.
And so they would flash like a problem on the screen for 5 seconds and then take it off. And
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
and I was good at it. So I guess you feel better about things that you're good at. So I like doing that kind of math. And even now, I see structures and geographical shapes when I'm doing math problems, rather than actually like doing them out. So yeah. Anyway,
Very cool.
so for our listeners, actually our viewing audience, wherever you choose, you can drop a line, I guess, in Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. But what was your favorite subject in school? Did you have a favorite? Drop us a line, leave us a comment, and we'll try and share that on a future episode. So Javier, back to the, I forgot what you called it, but this sort of, you showed me a diagram of Los Angeles, I believe, like the whole Los Angeles basin and the north-south arteries, if you will. There wasn't one that exists over in this side of the county. Is that correct?
Yeah. Just to provide a little bit of background and context on that. So I was involved in the city of Temple City when they were, throughout the process of developing and implementing that project that we were just talking about, the Class 4 bike lane. And it left a massive impression on me. But the truth is that, I was out there doing what we call bicycle counts, counting people on their bikes on the roadway to have a general baseline understanding of usage, roadway usage for bicyclists. And, the reality is, and it's no different than many other communities, but it's very low. Bicyclists are indeed a minority on a roadway. And so when you start thinking about the amount of real estate or space that they need for a minority of people, right? And then you juxtaposition that with the need to provide safe space, you end up in this position where where's the balance? What's the right balance? Because no matter what you do, it's going to require some degree of investment, right? But I said, you know what? This is a worthy cause. And these people on bikes and vulnerable road users deserve safe space. But now let's graduate this line of thinking from improving safety and mobility for that minority and elevate that to the majority. How do we move the masses north-south in that corridor, right? And it wasn't until years later, after going into, and I got to tell a little bit about this story before I complete the story on this project you're asking about, is from my organization Bike SGV, and also a partnership that I had with Day One. It was based in Pasadena, another nonprofit. I got recruited to work for Supervisor Hilda Solis for the 1st District of Los Angeles County, where I was the transportation deputy. But I also covered a lot of other issues, from economic development to homelessness to parks and open space, public works, utilities, things like that. It was a broad portfolio. But I recall further south from Temple City, in unincorporated Los Angeles County, the 1st District, there's Whittier Narrows, right? Where Lake is, and the 60 freeway is that main kind of, it transects, right? The Rosemead Boulevard. So you got the 60 that travels east-west, and then you got Rosemead Boulevard that goes north-south. And I remember, if you recall, what I was saying earlier about all these stories that would come to light about people getting hit on their bikes or walking or whatever. So when I went to work for the supervisor, I don't remember exactly. I could certainly look it up, but it was maybe like several months after transitioning from the nonprofit to the county, an individual died crossing the street because Rosemead Boulevard in that unincorporated area has a posted speed limit of 50 miles per hour. And the on-ramps to the 60 freeway are what they call free-flowing on-ramps. So there's no traffic control right? There's no lights, there's no stop signs. I mean, you just literally go from traveling 50 miles an hour on Rosemead Boulevard, transition onto the 60, and then go 65 miles an hour. So you're traveling fast to get onto the freeway. In the middle of that fast segment is a little crossing. No lights, no real visible markings on the street, dark day, dark night. And unfortunately, an individual got hit and died. And so, I brought to the supervisor's attention this need to improve safety, which kind of builds on some of this work that we've been doing. And she had already endorsed, the vast majority of the platform from the nonprofit for the policy agenda. And she gave us the authorization to improve that roadway, right? That particular segment of Rosemead Boulevard. Step one to do that was what we were talking about earlier, is to have the roadway relinquished from Caltrans to the county, so then we can then do all these improvements. So anyway, long story short, we ended up proceeding with that project. We got some resources, some funding, some grant money. The project to this day has not materialized, but there's reason for that, good reason. But at the same time, that stretch of roadway is also home to one of the largest regional parks in disadvantaged communities. Right? You got Whittier Narrows, Leg Lake, and that whole recreation area. So anyhow, I just remember clearly, distinctly working on Rosemead Boulevard with Temple City, Rosemead Boulevard in an incorporated, a small sliver of Rosemead Boulevard when I was working on the bike master plan with El Monte, South El Monte. So little by little over the years, I was kind of cobbling together experience along Rosemead Boulevard. And then you may have heard about the transportation renaissance that's taking place right now in LA County, right, with the results of Measure R and Measure M. Two measures, sales tax measures that were voted in by the county voters, generated an abundance of resources to then expand the light rail system. So you have the Gold Line that travels along the foothills that's currently being expanded all the way out to Claremont, possibly out to Montclair. You have the Gold Line that's being expanded from East LA all the way to the city of Whittier, the West Santa Ana branch, the Purple Line. And anyway, they're expanding the light rail system. Fast forward a little bit, I was working in the city of Pico Rivera, and I'm looking at the entire community with this, eye toward holistic master planning. And I started realizing, I was like, wow, this is an opportunity to cobble together yet another segment of Rosemead Boulevard, just south of the San Gabriel Valley, to maybe consider this effort of continuity from unincorporated LA County all the way south through Pico Rivera. And so I did a little bit of research and started working with other partners, and I found that the sub-regional governing agency in that area, in the Gateway Cities COG, had completed what is called a Complete Streets Master Plan and outlined a vision, a framework for improving Rosemead Lakewood Boulevard from Pico all the way down to Long Beach. And I took that and I said, wow, this is an opportunity to not only improve the safety for vulnerable road users, but now let's consider the masses. If we're going to do something the way Temple City did, let's master plan the heck out of this corridor. But to do that, you can't do it segment by segment by segment by segment at a time. So we launched an effort to serve as the lead entity for the Gateway Cities segment, which is about 16 miles from Pico to Long Beach, and introduce this vision for so originally you had this idea of complete streets, right, which for the most part focuses only on the streets, sidewalk, street, and sidewalk on the other side. But now this is an opportunity to also graduate and elevate the thinking a little bit more beyond just issues of mobility and safety, but we also have to address issues around housing, right? So that's when we came out with this concept of a complete corridor master plan versus a complete street master plan, because now that takes into account all the surrounding land uses along the corridor. So now we can have safe space for bikers, what we're now introducing is a bus rapid transit corridor, BRT, basically high frequency bus service. And the reason that's important is because the regional, what they call the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO, in this case it's SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, defines what high quality transit is. Anything that's 15-minute service or better. Now, the interesting thing about that is that if you can meet that threshold, then you can stimulate, promote, change land uses to catalyze what they call transit-oriented development, right, along that corridor.
And that's similar to what's happening east-west in the northern area.
Exactly.
So what is the corridor? Where does it run from? And
Rosemead. So it goes basically from the 210 freeway, let's just say. It could go a little bit further north, but the 210 freeway, Rosemead Boulevard, all the way south to the traffic circle in Long Beach where it hits PCH.
Okay.
That's 26.3 miles from north to south.
And the corridor, how wide is it?
You know, that's a good question because the corridor accordions in and out throughout that length, right? So you have some areas that are incredibly wide as a football field, if not even wider. You have some areas where it narrows down to maybe 3-4 lanes, right? Very small sidewalks. It's just really dependent on where it is in that segment. But there are what we call constraints or choke points along the corridor that most certainly need to be looked at deeply, addressed.
So this is a work in progress.
Right.
And is there a committee, organization, or what working this?
Yeah, so we have
project?
been working very, very hard to build up a coalition. Right, kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. If we were just one city trying to do this 26-mile long thing without the help and support from anybody else, then no one's really going to pay attention to us. Yeah. But the fact that we've been able to mobilize state senators, assembly members, other cities and their elected officials, community groups that are very much aligned with this kind of urban planning movement around transit and transit-oriented development and active transportation, things like that. So the coalition now is building. As a matter of fact, we just 2 weeks ago went to Washington, D.C. to present this project to the federal legislators that represent segments of that corridor. So in the north, you have Congresswoman Judy Chu, which is very fascinating because, you know, I was involved, not as involved as I was with other things, but involved with the establishment of the San Gabriel Mountains National Monument that was designated by President Obama. That was a piece of legislation that Congresswoman Judy Chu championed. Really credit her for that because, you know, the mountains mean a lot to me and my passion for biology and the mountains and things like that, right? So one of the interesting things about the National Monument, part of doing the environmental impact report, is that the most significant challenge to access the mountains is transportation. You cannot widen the roads on the mountain without impacting wildlife, you know, whether that be flora or fauna or, you know, just the natural habitats. So you can't get more cars up there to get more people up there. So then what's the solution? So, you know, Congresswoman Judy Chu, through the what they call the federal earmark program, is funding a bus shuttle program to get communities up and down the mountains. But a pilot is just that. It's temporary. So one of the things that we presented to her when we were in Washington, D.C., what if we explored this bus rapid transit corridor as a permanent solution to get people up and down the mountain? I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it's every 5th bus goes from the beach to the top of the mountains, or every 10th bus, or every, you know, whatever, one bus an hour, or only on the weekends. Who knows? Yeah, we'll get to that point. But all to say is that we were looking at this, introducing this kind of vision as a way to address a myriad of issues, challenges, right? That being one of them, access to the national mountains. Yeah. Then we presented it to others along the corridor. Our representative in Pico Rivera has been a champion for us, for the region. Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, Congresswoman Grace Napolitano. We also presented it further south in the corridor to Congresswoman Nanette Barragan. and also to the office of Robert Garcia, new Congress member that represents the city of Long Beach, which is where the terminus is of that corridor. But here's what's interesting, right? Because we're building out this new transit system, and we're looking at this area and we're realizing, wow, this corridor from head to toe runs immediately parallel, relatively speaking, to the 605 freeway. If anyone knows the 605 freeway, it's a parking lot.
Yeah.
So we get back to this idea of moving the masses.
Right.
And societal behavioral change. So if you can get north-south on this corridor faster than you can get north-south on the 605, you've introduced a meaningful alternative.
You've accomplished something.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it provides people with a real option, a choice.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. With that comes lifestyle changes. But the safer you are in that lifestyle, kind of going back to this idea of creating environments that are safe for moms, if you create a safe enough environment for people to easily make that choice, and they end up having a great experience, they'll likely do it more often.
Right.
And the more often they do it, then you start making a difference when it comes to societal change.
And all that started with a bike accident.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I could take a bus that's going to come every 15 minutes and get to Long Beach, I would consider that. Yeah, instead of sitting, depending on the time of day, which is like you either have to be before 5 o'clock and after 10 o'clock, maybe on the 605, right? But there's so much information here for our listeners to digest. We sort of have to move the show on, and I want to point them to either you or a resource where they can learn more before we move on. If they wanted to learn more about this project and maybe support it, where should they go?
Thank you for that. So right now, because obviously I work for the City of Pico Rivera, so I use the resources that I have at my disposal. So right now, a lot of that information lives on our city website. But we're currently working with other partners, non-government partners, to also create dedicated websites so that it's a little bit beyond the City of Pico Rivera, because we don't want to give this impression that the City of Pico Rivera is kind of trying to take over in this world or nothing like that. We're just trying to get the ball moving and then allow community, frankly, and this is very pivotal for a lot of the work that I do, and it talks a lot about the mobilization that I did with communities and how we were effective in moving public policy. We're empowering community to participate throughout this process, but we want to empower community enough to the point where they carry these types of initiatives and projects through implementation.
What's the name of the Pico Rivera website?
Yeah, so it's www.pico-rivera.com.
Awesome. Well, actually, we have two segments to get to. One is I never asked you about your item.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Can you briefly describe the item that you brought with you? It's, typically it goes on the table, but it couldn't. So what is the item that you brought with you?
Yeah. I brought my bicycle.
Okay.
I call it my beater, my commuter bike. I brought the bicycle because it frankly is a symbol of a lot of the change that I've worked throughout my life to introduce. It serves as a symbol to represent the many people who have shared their stories with me, the people who have passed away or have been injured. It serves as a tool for modernizing our environments, our communities. It's so funny because it's a freaking bicycle. It's so simple, and there's no glitz or glam associated with my bike. It's an old steel bicycle, gets me from point A to point B. I get a darn good exercise out of it. I feel incredibly good because my endorphins are just jumping. And it just reminds me of the freedom of being a child, being young keeps me young. So I brought that item to represent all of that, right? And also just to kind of as a message to just broader audiences that sometimes you don't need to overcomplicate your life to get physically active, to reverse things like obesity. Maybe just jump on a bike, get around the neighborhood.
Thank you for that. Well, Javier, we're going to move on to our final segment of the show where we get to learn more about you.
So what are 3 places, events, locations, restaurants, anything that mean something to you that are memorable? Your SGV3 is what we would like to call it.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm breaking the rules here. It's not necessarily a thing, at least my first one on my item, my first thing that I want to bring to light is it's the people of the San Gabriel Valley. The degree of diversity of people. And the reason I like it or love it, frankly, so much, it's because it's very different than a lot of other places in LA County or Southern California. You have a strong concentration of different people in the San Gabriel Valley. And the reason I love that is because people have different cultures. And I love to learn about other people's culture. I love their food. I love their mannerisms within themselves, within their respective groups. I love their art. I love their language. And I have built throughout this entire, effort that I was just describing earlier, I've built so many great relationships with people, meaningful, long-standing relationships.
Yeah.
And people have welcomed me into their home, and as a result, I got to say that's probably the one thing at the top of my list is the people.
Yeah, that's, again, a revolutionary thought, but actually very basic in its presentation. Yeah, it's the people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's a good one. How about 2 and 3?
Okay, so 2 is also maybe bending the rules a tad because it's not an individual thing. It's parks, open space, trails, mountains of the San Gabriel Valley. Like I said at the very beginning, I grew up mountain biking in the Puente Hills off of Turnbull Canyon. And I loved it. And, growing up in Hacienda Heights, at no point that I ever really learned that it was, the Puente Hills was also home to one of the largest landfills in the United States. I never saw that, right? I just saw the beauty surrounded by trees.
Is that in Walnut or?
No, it's right.
Puente Hills, huh?
Yeah, Puente Hills, I would say 60 Freeway 605.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the Puente Hills landfill. And
no, so it's not the Rose Hills side.
It's right next door to Rose Hill, the
is.
cemetery. Yeah.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah, it was one of the largest landfills in the United States for a long time.
Wow.
And they've since decommissioned it and are now in the process of converting it into a large regional park. If you've ever been up there, the vistas, you get 360-degree views of the Orange County and LA County and downtown Los Angeles, and the mountain landscape is just beautiful. So there's this I'm enamored with open space, parks, trails. And I think that really comes back to my love for biology and what I experienced in Costa Rica and this itch to create more open space. The third is actually one open space that lent itself to having a broader appreciation for all the parks, all the open spaces, and all the people, to having a broader appreciation for all the parks, all the open spaces, and all the people, and that's the Emerald Necklace. So the Emerald Necklace is the San Gabriel River, give or take, let's say from North El Monte area, Baldwin Park area, south until you hit Whittier Narrows Recreation Area, which is the emerald of the necklace. And then it curls around to the Rio Hondo, if you're traveling north, that ends at Peck Road Park, Water Conservation Park area. Altogether, the necklace, the loop, is about 17 and a half miles long. And it's a class 1 bike path, dedicated bike lane off the streets, very safe. It's shared with the equestrian community. It's you're riding along the river, so you occasionally see the wildlife.
Okay, well, that's a new one to me. But
Nate McCusker of Angry Horse Brewing, that was one of his.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So, that's funny. I don't remember. It sounds vaguely familiar, but I thought it was new. Okay.
Sorry, I said Nate. I think it's Nathan.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
The reason why it's, I would say, my absolute favorite, because it goes through so many communities. In all those communities, as I mentioned about my love for diversity, it goes through so many diverse communities. You get to see kind of like this backside of all these communities that you otherwise don't see if you're just getting around in the car. And then there's been this concerted effort between the county, another nonprofit, Amigos de los Rios, led up by Claire Robinson, really inspired a lot of the work that I did and continue to do. But they've been building a string of parks. Again, kind of this concept around holistic master planning. They did a holistic master plan for the Emerald Necklace to build new parks, new open space, whether that be a micro park, a parklet, a bigger park, dog parks, more trail access points, rest areas, things like that. But the beautiful thing is like you can travel 5 minutes down the pathway and be in an entirely different environment where you're like in an equestrian community surrounded by horses, ride another 10 minutes and, you're watching planes land on the tarmac at the El Monte Airport. There's just so many different things that you can experience on the Emerald Necklace.
Wow. That's pretty cool. I'm going to have to do that one day. Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing those three. Very unique. Even if we've heard the Emerald Necklace once before, it's still your perspective is unique to our audience. Javier, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your story and your insight and perspective into sort of changing, improving the landscape of the San Gabriel Valley. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. I appreciate the invitation again.
Thank you. Well, there you go, SGVers. There's another show for you. We hope you enjoyed this content. If you do, please consider sharing, and subscribing, and leave us a comment about what you think about the use of our roadways, giving some, more equal use to those, and improving, transportation north and south from Long Beach to the mountains here. You can find our full back catalog of episodes on our website, mysgv.net. And until next week, we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us on the MySGV podcast. Check out more of our content on our website, mysgv.net. This show was produced by Russell Mono and edited by Victoria Allers of Kind Monster Productions. If you'd like to join us next week as we capture and share more stories from our diverse community, feel welcome.
Nice matter. No, kind matter.